Ebony, for more on this, Tiffany Cross and Chris Wilson join us now. Tiffany is the managing editor of the Beat DC and a co-host of the Beat DC podcast. Chris is a former Cruz campaign pollster and partner of WPA Opinion Research. Thanks for coming in on a Saturday.
You bet.
So former vice presidential nominee Joe Lieberman is concerned Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has taken the party too far to the left. Take a listen to this.
If the victory of Ms. Ocasio-Cortez is in Bronx and Queens is taken as the direction in which the Democratic Party should go nationally, the Democratic Party is not going to elect a president in 2020.
Is that a legitimate concern for your side, Tiffany?
I don't think so. First of all, I think the fact that Joe Lieberman emerged from political irrelevance to even raise this issue, most people who follow Alexandria Cortez are under the age of 30. They're going to have to Google who Joe Lieberman is. He's not the voice of the Democratic Party by any means. I think the things that Alexandria is pushing are things that are not inconsistent with the Democratic Party. She's pushing for things like a $15 minimum wage, Medicare for all. And so I think she's very consistent with where Democrats stand, and I don't think that's a discord. Just this week, the Democrats launched the Medicare for all caucus in Congress. I think the real question is how concerned are Republicans that she's gaining such national traction in advance of midterms, while the leader of their party was more interested in putting the interest of a foreign adversary before American people.
And Joe Lieberman served a long time on Capitol Hill, was a vice presidential nominee for the Democratic Party. Chris, is Ocasio-Cortez moving incumbent Democrats too far to the left?
Well, I would like to encourage the Democratic Party to make her the face of the party and adopt all of her positions. I think if that does occur, then Joe Lieberman is right. The Democrats may never win another election. And in fact, I've got to imagine the Democrats running in the Trump red states, Democrats running in Montana, Missouri, where she is. Claire McCaskill's got to be cringing every time that she gets coverage up there. Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota. These positions do not play well. It's one thing when you have Ocasio-Cortez who's making comments supporting these sort of far left-wing ideas, but when the Democratic Party as a whole starts to adopt a form of government and a form of an economic standard that is completely contrary to our American values, it shows that the party's really kind of gotten off the rails and the inmates are now running the asylum.
Tiffany, what about the point that there are a lot of red state Democrats in states that President Trump won up for re-election this year? Are they being dragged too far to the left?
I don't think so, and I don't think that we can just focus on red state Democrats. I think even in the Democratic leadership, people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer aren't necessarily leading the party to the left. They're being pushed to the left by people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez because they're a younger party and they have a longer life to live, and they're going to have to suffer the consequences of a GOP-led Congress that's chipping away at the core patriotic values that has thrived in America for so long.
Chris, does this remind you a little bit of what the Tea Party did in terms of fighting for conservative values on the Republican side of things, pushing Republicans to the right?
You know, I do think there are some similarities between the Tea Party, but I think the difference is you look at somebody like up in Alaska where you had a Tea Party candidate that Republicans looked at and said, you know, this guy does not belong in the United States Senate. And so they ran a write-in campaign for Lisa Murkowski and put her back in the Senate. So I do believe we've done a good job sort of adjusting and finding those candidates that didn't really represent our values, the Republican values, and making changes there so they didn't get elected to Congress. But I do agree Tiffany's point about Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic leadership being pushed to the left. And it is, that's why, frankly, Joe Crowley isn't going to be returning to Congress, is because he didn't move far enough to the left quickly enough. You have situations where Dianne Feinstein is too moderate for Democrats in California, and so she doesn't get the state party endorsement. And even the CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, made a comment recently that the Democratic Party is just getting way too far out there in terms of coming up with policies that there's no way that the United States could pay for without going bankrupt. And this is a guy who was looking at running for president on the Democratic ticket in 2020. So I do think the evolution that's occurring within the party and the civil war that's happening there is really not a great face for them to be dealing with as we move into a crucial midterm elections for them.
Okay,
Mike, can I just say, though, that the United States is prepared to pay $12 million for the president's military parade? That's really just a charade. So it's really interesting when Republicans want to bring up what costs taxpayers money in terms of having Medicare and free college tuition for all people.
Okay,
I'm against the parade, just to be clear.
Let me switch gears a little bit. What about the battle this week in Congress over ICE? Vice President Mike Pence weighed in today. Let's take a listen to him.
While some leading Democrats across this country are actually calling to abolish this agency, I'm going to make you a promise. Under this administration, we will never abolish ICE. I mean, despite all the irresponsible rhetoric by many on the liberal left. Here are the numbers. Last year alone, ICE agents arrested more than 127,000 illegal immigrants.
Tiffany, was it wise making those folks villains for enforcing the law?
I don't think that it was unwise. I think this country has survived without ICE for a long time. The agency is only 15 years old. It was birthed out of 9/11. And not all Democrats are calling for the abolishment of ICE. There are a huge amount of Democrats who aren't. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus has distanced themselves from the call. I think as long as you have this administration in place, killing ICE, I don't know what kind of problems that would solve. I think you would still have policies and politics that feed into Trump's base of painting, all immigrants as all undocumented immigrants as criminals. Which obviously is very false. So I'm not sure that it was unwise, but I do think that it's a healthy exchange of ideas and ideologies in the Democratic Party as we see this generational shift happening. I don't support the call, but I don't blame people for making the call.
Chris, your reaction to Tiffany's take?
Well, I think Democrats had a winning issue whenever they were trying to focus on the children being separated from their families in detention center. And instead of focusing on that winning issue, they sort of snagged defeat from the jaws of victory and made it about the abolishment of ICE. And so you've got, this is something that is about as far radical of an idea as could potentially be pushed by the Democrats right now. And you've got it being led by some of the Democrat Senate candidates like Beto O'Rourke in Texas and others that are coming out and really making these far left-wing calls that would weaken our national security, weaken border security. And again, I just think through how the Democrats running in states like Kansas, like Missouri and North Dakota and Montana and Michigan and Wisconsin have got to be like cringing every time that they open their mouth and say things like this because it's so far outside the mainstream.
All right, let's get to topic number 3. Comedian Michelle Wolf at the center of controversy once again after comparing ICE to the terror group ISIS. The sketch from her Netflix show The Break parodies an ICE recruitment video with immigration agents dressed like terrorists. Wolf portrays Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen.
It's popular nowadays to say ICE is bad, but there's no better representation of American values right now than ISIS.
Wolf also came under a firestorm of criticism earlier this year for her provocative jokes during the White House Correspondents' Dinner. So what about this? Is she taking comedy a little too far there, Chris?
Well, one, I don't think it's funny, so I don't know that I would say she's taking comedy too far. She's certainly going too far. And I just wonder at what point do the people to Netflix or people who are inviting her to give speeches or come to comedy clubs just say, enough is enough. This is a woman who is continuing to push the envelope, continuing to embarrass the people who support her. I know I was sitting at a table at the White House Correspondents' Dinner with some people who were on the board, and they just were cringing every time she spoke. And it's going too far, and it is at some point, this country, we're going to return to civility. Tiffany and I were having a great conversation earlier, and it's a shame that we cannot have those sorts of ongoing civil conversations between the party all the time, and it's people like Michelle Wolf that make it difficult to do so.
Tiffany, your thoughts on ICE and ISIS?
Well, I think it's a little bit ridiculous, and I wouldn't put Chris in this category, but I think there are a lot of people in America who cheer on Roseanne Barr and her ridiculous comments and scoff at Michelle Wolf, and this is where your hypocrisy comes into play. And let's not forget the comments made by the person who actually matters. All it takes is one look at the president's Twitter feed and the disgusting rhetoric that comes out of his mouth, and to compare him to Michelle Wolf, a comedian who's an entertainer. And when we have the leader of the free world making such ridiculous comments, I think that's where our focus should be, not on what comedians are saying.
Although my sense is a lot of folks out there probably irritated because you've got ISIS cutting people's heads off and ICE enforcing our immigration laws. They're not the people who write the immigration laws, they enforce them. Final thoughts, Chris?
Well, Roseanne Barr was canceled. I think that's exactly what should happen to Michelle Wolf after this. I mean, for them to tolerate this sort of rhetoric, it goes beyond the pale of what should be acceptable.
Tiffany, final thoughts?
Well, there were almost 3,000 children who were essentially kidnapped from their parents and stored in cages. I think that's where our thoughts and sympathies should be, not with conversations wasted on what comedians are saying.
All right. Tiffany Cross, Chris Wilson, enjoyed the discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mike.